Hey guys, Mr. Wupker here again. I try to do these videos in random places, so today you get me outside of Starbucks in North Montana. Um, I will be recording our last Cold War video notes. This is section 4 of our video notes. I'll give you the PowerPoint check on Monday, so you'll be good to go. If you have any questions, please let me know. You can send me a message on Remind, or you can send me an email. I can't wait to be back with you guys um, pretty soon, up in coming days. I think we have about 4 weeks left on jury duty, so I'm so excited to get this going. So there was two ways that the United States thought that they could sort of face Russia during the Cold War. There was brinkmanship and something called détente. So in brinkmanship, the idea was that we can do everything we can to get to the brink of war. The word brink means the edge. So brinkmanship said that we were going to get to the edge of war, to the brink of war, to push them to want to be like us, because we knew that they didn't actually want to go to war. So the idea of brinkmanship means that we can have somebody go to the edge of war without actually having them go. The second way that we wanted to deal with Russia during the Cold War was called détente. So what détente is if you can make them be your friend, then maybe they would agree with you. Think about friends that when they get in fights, if you have a common friend with each other that can talk it out, usually things go better. So brinkmanship, think of it as two people fighting and they're trying to call each other out, saying they're not down, seeing who's going to step down first. Détente, think of it as two friends that are going to fight, and instead of fighting, they find something they agree on and end the fight. So brinkmanship is when you're about to fight. Détente is when you try to become friends so you don't fight. So at first, the United States tried to do something called brinkmanship, where we got to the edge of war but didn't actually do it. And then we did détente, where if we can try and be their friends and find something they agree on, then maybe we can avoid war that way. So the way the Soviet Union really ended sort of was a not sudden. It wasn't like overnight the country ended, but it was little baby steps that led to the fall of the Soviet Union. So in 1953, Joseph Stalin died, and after Joseph Stalin, people took over the country that weren't as strong or as much of a dictator as Stalin was. And so they tried to do different things to try and bring money to Russia. So they opened it up so that way trade could come in. So people from America could trade with the Soviet Union, or people from France or other countries could trade with the Soviet Union. Stalin didn't allow any of that. So when other people took power and allowed this to happen, it opened up people in the communist countries, and it made them understand what life was like outside of communist Russia, which led um, to them becoming more democratic. Um, Also, as they became more lenient, they were not able to keep control of the countries that they took over after World War II, like Czechoslovakia and Hungary, and so those countries began to protest against Russia, and in doing so, they were able to try and fight for their own freedom, which Russia had to shut down in a pretty hard way. For a long time, they used military power to hold it down, and then later they ended up losing these revolutions, in places like Czechoslovakia and Hungary were able to gain their freedom. So even though the Soviet Union becomes less controlling, China, which is another communist country in the time, does not do that. They become more controlling. So as the Soviet Union gives up power and becomes a little more democratic, although they're not truly a democracy, um, China doesn't follow them. And they say, well, you know what? If you're going to be weak, go ahead and be weak, but we're going to be the strong communist country. And so they become the leader um, under communism. And so the United States, when they react to this, usually what they did for a long time is they were hardliners. They didn't want anything to do with the Soviet Union or with communism as a whole, so we wouldn't even talk to communist countries for a long time. But under John F. Kennedy in the 1960s, and then later Richard Nixon in the 70s, what the United States decided to do is that they were going to try to open up, use detente, be friends. So remember, brinkmanship is closed down. We don't want to talk to you. We're going to go to war with you. And then détente is we're going to try and get to know you, and and have less tension, so that way we can build relationships and maybe find stuff that we can agree on and negotiate um, in the world. And so, for the first time ever, in 1972, Richard Nixon is the first U.S. president since World War II to go to a communist country. And so he met with China and the Soviet Union in 1972, and he passes something called SALT I. And so, what the SALT agreement is it is an agreement to lower the amount of nuclear weapons that existed in the world. So they cut back how many nuclear weapons and how many nuclear missiles there were. And so this was sort of an idea that America could create peace with China and with Russia without having to agree with everything they did politically or economically. I have really good news for you guys. This is our last slide. I know we only had like 4 slides this week. I made it really easy for you. Make sure to highlight your answers in your notebooks and in your notes. That way I don't have to mark points off of you, because that's a lame reason to lose points just because you didn't highlight answers. Make sure you highlight those answers. I will appreciate it. So, communism ends up falling apart, right? So it doesn't last as long as I think it is, and this really begins in the 1970s. Um, Basically, what happened is late in the 70s, we left détente. We said, you know what? Maybe being friends isn't working as quick as we thought it would be. We need to be hardliners um, on the communists and make them end the war or end the Cold War as a whole. So. Uh, we we elect in the United States an anti-communist leader who is very extremely against um, Russia and the things that Russia does. His name is President Ronald Reagan. And so what Ronald Reagan says is, we aren't going to negotiate with you anymore. As we negotiated with you guys haven't changed. So instead, we're going to take a hard line again. And so Reagan refuses um, to interact with the Soviet Union. He refuses to pass treaties with them, and he actually refuses to trade with them at all. He shuts down any bank that they use in the United States. He did not allow them to access their money, and he passes bills that basically doesn't allow the Soviet Union to trade with anybody in the world. So because of this, the Soviet Union's market or stock market collapsed. They had their own like Great Depression in the 80s, and the union could no longer afford to run as a government. So because they lost money, they couldn't invest money in their army, which meant that when people protested in Czechoslovakia and Hungary and other parts of the Soviet Union, they did not have a military to stop them from expanding. And so basically, in 1992, the Soviet Union completely falls apart. Ronald Reagan famously helps people tear down the Berlin Wall, which separated East and West Berlin. Um, and this leads to the fall of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, where the United States uh, ends up being the dominant country in the world, and the Soviet Union falls to the wayside and really falls apart and becomes what is now modern day Russia. So they lost a lot of the countries that they took over during World War II. They got their own freedom. Czechoslovakia, for example, is its own country now. Um, Azerbaijan is a country that used to be controlled by the Soviet Union and now has its own freedom thanks to the fall of the Soviet Union. And so what we see is that communism as a whole has been slowly decreasing over the years, even in places like China and Vietnam, where there's still a communist country. They're not as strong of communists as they were in the 60s and 70s. And what we see is a rise in um, democracy. So thank you so much. I hope you have a good day. I hope you appreciate the guy randomly staring in the background. Um, Thank you so much. Remember to highlight your answers in your notebooks. I hope you have a great day and a great week. If you have any questions, feel free to message me or send me a remind. Um, Thank you for enjoying our Cold War PowerPoints.